I had worked the West Wing of the Hartwell Museum for 31 years, mostly evenings, mostly quiet, and in all that time, I had never seen security move that fast for a man who wasn't already running. It was 9:45, the after-dinner lull of the benefactor's gala, when the radios on every guard's hip crackled at once. A man near the loading entrance, dark coat, canvas bag, behaving erratically. The same description, more or less, of someone who'd been causing trouble outside the gates all week, rattling the side doors, shouting about the museum's expansion eating up the block he'd grown up on. Nobody had a photograph. Nobody had a name. They had a coat and a bag, and within 30 seconds they had Marcus. I watched it happen from the coffee station, my tray still in my hands. Two guards came across the atrium floor faster than I'd ever seen them move on marble, and they took hold of him by both arms right beside the dessert table, in front of 40 guests in black tie who had been laughing about something a moment before and now weren't laughing at all. "That's not," Marcus said, and that was as far as he got. I knew him. Everyone on staff knew him. Marcus Webb had checked coats and called cabs at the Hartwell for almost 3 years, 24 years old, quiet, polite to a fault, the kind of young man who remembered your name after one introduction and used it every time after. He carried a canvas satchel because the museum didn't believe in lockers for part-time staff, and what was in that satchel, as it turned out, was sheet music, but nobody asked him to open it. They asked him to stand still and stop resisting, though he wasn't resisting anything. He was standing in the middle of his own job, stunned. Eleanor Voss got there before I did. She was the gala's chair that year, had been for 6 years running, a woman who took the museum's reputation as seriously as her own pulse. And when she saw a guest-facing incident unfolding in the middle of her atrium during the gala's most photographed hour, she did what any panicked host does. She made it worse before she made it better. "Get him out of here," she said, not cruelly, frightened. There is a difference, though it rarely looks like one from the outside. "Now, please," before anyone already had. Phones were up. A woman near the bar was filming with the particular stillness people get when they think they're capturing something important. They walked him toward the service corridor with his satchel still clutched against his chest, and the room he left behind did not go back to its champagne. It went quiet in the specific way a room goes quiet when it suspects it has just watched something it will be ashamed of by morning. It took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the cloakroom the whole time, willing it to move faster, for the head of security to radio back that the man matching the outside description had been stopped 2 blocks away by police nowhere near our doors. 11 minutes for someone to open Marcus's satchel at his own quiet insistence and find nothing in it but a folder of music marked in pencil, fingerings, a name in the corner that was his own. He came back into the atrium on his own feet because nobody could think of a graceful way to keep him out, and that was somehow worse than if they'd marched him. He stood near the doorway in his good dark coat, dignity held together with both hands, while 40 guests pretended not to look at him and looked anyway. Eleanor crossed to him first. I'll give her that. She didn't send someone else. Mr. Webb. She used his name. Someone must have told her it, in the scramble. I am so sorry. There is no excuse, and I am not going to give you one. Thank you, he said, which was generous of him, and which fixed exactly nothing. The gala was supposed to close with a short recital. A pianist had been booked for months, a rising name from the city conservatory, the kind of detail that goes on the program in italics. He had canceled that afternoon with a stomach virus, and in the scramble of the evening nobody had mentioned it yet to the room, because nobody had wanted one more thing to go wrong. Now the piano sat in the center of the atrium under its single overhead light, gleaming, untouched, and entirely beside the point as far as anyone but me seemed to notice. Marcus noticed it too. I watched him look at it the way you look at a door in a house you used to live in. "Mrs. Voss." His voice had gone very quiet, but it carried because the room around us had gone quiet enough to let it. "Your pianist isn't coming tonight. I heard the catering captain say so." That's true, but I don't see how. I trained at Linden Conservatory for 2 years before I had to stop. I still play. If it would help the evening, I'd like to. I have stood in that atrium for 3 decades and watched a great many silences. I had never stood in one quite like that. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Long enough I think, to understand exactly what she was being offered and exactly what it would cost her if she said no to it twice in one night. Please, she said. He set the satchel down beside the bench the way another man might set down a weapon he'd been carrying too long, and he sat. The room did not relax. Not yet. People were still holding their glasses the careful way you hold something when you're not sure your hands are steady. A few were still looking at the doorway, half expecting a second wave of guards, a correction, an end to whatever strange thing was happening. Marcus didn't look at any of them. He looked at the keys the way you look at a friend you haven't seen in a long time, checking that they're really there. The first notes were so quiet, I thought for a moment the piano hadn't been tuned, that something was wrong with it. And then I understood that nothing was wrong, that he had simply begun softer than any performer I had heard in that hall in 31 years, as though the music itself knew the room needed easing into rather than struck. Brahms, I didn't know it yet by name. A slow intermezzo, the kind of piece written for a room exactly like the one he was in, unsettled and needing, more than applause, to be told that it was safe now. The phones came down first. I noticed that before anything else, the small mercy of 40 people deciding, almost at once and without a word passed between them, that this was not a thing to be filmed. By the 8th bar, the woman near the bar who'd been filming earlier had her hand pressed flat against her own chest. By the 16th, the head of security, the same man who had given the order to take Marcus's arms, was standing very straight near the service corridor with an expression I can only describe as a man doing long division in his head, trying to make two numbers add up that refused to. Marcus played with his eyes mostly closed, the way some people pray and some people apologize, his shoulders dropping lower with every phrase, as though the music were physically loosening something that the last half hour had wound too tight. The melody turned over on itself, fell, caught itself on a low note, and rose again. And partway through I realized he had drifted from whatever the composer had written into something of his own, a thread that wasn't quite the printed piece anymore, but a private continuation of it, the kind of thing a person plays only when they trust the room enough to stop reading and start telling the truth. I have heard better players. I want to be honest about that, because honesty is the only thing I have to offer this account. I have heard hands more technically perfect than his move across those same keys in that same hall. But I have never, in 31 years, watched a room change the way that room changed. Not because the music was the finest the Hartwell had ever hosted, but because of what it was doing while it played. It was answering a question nobody had been brave enough to ask out loud. Was he what they'd assumed, for 11 frightened minutes, that he might be? And here was the answer, unfolding one phrase at a time, patient and unhurried and entirely without anger, though God knows he'd have been forgiven for some. The piece climbed once, briefly, into something almost bright, and then settled back down into its own quiet ending, the way a held breath finally goes out. His hands came to rest on the keys without lifting all the way off, the last chord still humming faintly under his palms, and for 3 full seconds nobody in that atrium made a sound at all. Then Eleanor Voss began to cry, openly, without trying to hide it, which I had genuinely never seen her do at any function in 6 years of watching her run them. The applause that followed wasn't loud. I want to be precise about that too, because I think it matters more than if it had been. It was the kind of applause that comes from people who are ashamed to be applauding and can't stop themselves anyway. Uneven, swelling slow, somebody starting, and 3 others joining a half beat late, because they needed that extra half beat to remember how their hand worked. Eleanor crossed the floor to him a second time that night, and this time she didn't stop at arm's length. I'm going to say this in front of everyone in this room, she said, because that is where the other thing happened, and that is where this needs to happen too. Mr. Webb, I am sorry. I was frightened and I was careless with you, and there is no version of tonight where that is acceptable, whatever you had just played for us. She paused, and I watched her decide something in real time. Linden Conservatory has a seat on its board that owes my family a favor or two. If you'd like to finish what you started there, I would like to help you finish it. He didn't answer right away. I think he was still somewhere inside the last chord. I'd like that, he said finally. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Just play again sometime when nobody's dragged you into it first. The gala wound down an hour later the way galas do, slow and warm, the kind of evening people remember fondly by the time they're collecting their coats, though I doubt many of them could have told you what was on the dinner menu by the following week. What they remembered, what I still hear about from board members 3 years on whenever the subject of that gala comes up, was the 11 minutes and the quiet after them, and the boy at the piano who had every reason in the world to leave and instead sat down and gave the room back something it had no right to ask for. I helped Marcus into his coat at the end of the night, the way I'd helped 100 guests into theirs over the years, except this time it was the coat check man being helped, and he let me, which told me more about how tired he was than anything he said. You didn't have to do that, I told him. After all that. He thought about it for a moment, the satchel back over his shoulder, the museum quiet and golden lit around us the way it only gets after the last guest is gone. I think I did, actually, he said. It was the only thing I had left in the room that they hadn't already taken a guess at. I have told that story more times than I can count since. To new docents during their first week, to board members who weren't there and ask why the museum quietly funds a scholarship seat at Linden every year and never puts its name on the program. I tell them about the radios and the bag and the 11 minutes because it's important that part isn't forgotten either. But mostly I tell them about the room going still and the chord still humming under his hands and the particular kind of silence a place makes when it has just learned the hard way what it almost threw out the back door.